My name is Thomas Moore. I am 75 years old, and I just moved into the most beautiful house I have ever seen in my life, last week, alone. Before I continue, know that this is a real story sent to this channel, represented by artificial intelligence. If you enjoy stories about real lives, write in the comments what city you are watching this video from. There are 4 bedrooms upstairs. I built them for people who are no longer here. There is a kitchen I designed around the idea of Sunday breakfast that will never happen. There is a backyard with a fire pit, and I sat next to it last night by myself in the cold, and I thought, this is the monument I built to everything I got wrong. I am not saying this to feel sorry for myself. I am saying it because I need you to understand something before you keep running. Before you sign that next contract, before you skip that birthday dinner, before you answer that email on Christmas morning. I need you to hear what this house sounds like at night. It sounds like nothing. And nothing when you are 75 and your knees ache and your coffee gets cold before you even remember to drink it is the loudest sound in the world. I survived a heart attack at 67 and a prostate cancer diagnosis at 71. I buried my wife. I estranged my son for 11 years over something so stupid I cannot even say it out loud without shame. I built a career that people admired and a life that looked from the outside like something worth having. None of that prepared me for the silence of this house. I was born in 1950 in a small town in Ohio. My father worked in a steel mill. He came home every night smelling of iron and sweat, sat at the dinner table, ate without saying much, and went to bed. He was not cruel. He was just absent in the way that men of his generation were taught to be. Work hard, provide, don't complain. That was the whole manual, and I took that manual and I ran with it. In 1972, I got my first real job at an engineering firm in Cincinnati. I was 22 years old. I remember the smell of that office like it was yesterday. Cheap carpet and burnt coffee and the particular chemical smell of blueprints. I loved it. I genuinely loved it. There was something in solving structural problems and making things that stood up that made me feel like I mattered. I stayed late every night that first year, not because anyone asked me to, because I wanted to. Because when I was at that drafting table, I felt like I was building something real. I met Ruth in 1974. She was a teacher. She laughed easily. She cooked without recipes. She had this way of touching your arm when she talked to you that made you feel like the only person in the room. I fell in love with her inside of 3 weeks. We were married in June of 1975, and then I did what my father had done before me, not all at once, slowly. The way a house settles, you don't notice the cracks forming until one day the door doesn't close right anymore. I started working 60 hours a week by 1977. We had our son Daniel in 1978, and I remember holding him in the hospital, this tiny red screaming person, and thinking, I need to work harder now. That was my first thought, not I want to be here for this. I need to provide better. I convinced myself it was love. Maybe it was in some way, but love that always translates to absence is still absence. By 1983, I was running a department. By 1986, I had started my own firm. The 80s were this relentless, intoxicating decade if you were building something in business. Everyone around me was accelerating. I accelerated with them. I remember getting a contract in 1988, the biggest one I had landed to that point, a commercial development in downtown Columbus. I was at the office when we got the call. My assistant brought in a bottle of champagne, and I remember thinking I should call Ruth, but there were things to do, documents to review, a team to manage. I called her at 11 that night. She had already put Daniel to bed and fallen asleep herself. I left a voicemail. She said congratulations the next morning at breakfast and went back to reading the newspaper. We did not know how to celebrate together anymore. We had been living parallel lives for so long that we had forgotten how to intersect. I was not a violent man. I was not a drunk. I never did anything that would make a good villain out of me. That is almost the problem. The damage I did was quiet. It was the dinners I missed. It was the school plays I sat in the back of and left before the applause ended because I had an early flight. It was the way I could be in a room with my family and still somehow be unreachable. Ruth used to say I had a wall. I thought that was a compliment. I thought being contained was a strength. I told myself that real men do not flood every room they walk into with their feelings. I told myself that showing up financially was the same as showing up. I was wrong about that for 30 years before I understood I was wrong. The 1990s passed in a blur of projects and contracts and hotel rooms that all looked the same. Daniel grew up while I was traveling. I missed his first driving lesson. I missed the night he came home with a broken nose from a fight at school and needed someone to sit with him. Ruth sat with him. Ruth always sat with him. I was in Denver or Dallas or somewhere with a plastic key card and a minibar I never used because I was always in meetings. I retired at 68. And I want to be honest about what retirement felt like because no one tells you this part. It did not feel like freedom. It felt like amputation. I had built my entire sense of self around what I did, not who I was. And the day I handed over the firm, I genuinely did not know who Thomas More was without the work. I walked around my house for 3 months like a guest in someone else's home. The turning point was not dramatic. It was a Tuesday in March of 2019. I was in the hospital, not for me, for Ruth. She had been having headaches for 6 weeks. We went in for what we thought was a routine scan. I remember the waiting room, fluorescent lights, a television in the corner playing a cooking show with the volume too low to hear, a vending machine humming in the corner. I drank 2 cups of coffee that tasted like hot cardboard. Ruth was inside for 40 minutes. When the doctor came out, he sat down across from us, and the way he sat, slowly, deliberately, like he was choosing his weight carefully, I knew before he opened his mouth. Glioblastoma, stage 4, aggressive. We are talking about months, not years. I remember the drive home. Ruth was in the passenger seat, looking out the window, and she said, "I want to go to Portugal. I've always wanted to see Lisbon." Just like that. No crying, no panic. She said it the way you say, "I think I want pasta tonight." And I realized that in 44 years of marriage, I had never once taken her to Portugal. She had mentioned it, I think, maybe a dozen times over the decades. There was always a reason we went somewhere else, something work-related or something more practical. We went to Lisbon in June of 2019. She was already on medication. She moved slowly. But I remember her face on the tram going up through the old city, the yellow light coming through the windows. And she looked at me and smiled, and it was the first time in maybe 20 years that I felt like we were actually together in the same moment. She died in November of 2019. October 31st was her last coherent day. We watched an old movie she loved, and I held her hand the entire time, and I remember thinking, I should have been holding her hand for 40 years, and I wasted most of it. After she died, I found a notebook in her bedside drawer. It was small, green, the kind you buy at a drugstore. Inside, she had written, in her handwriting, a list of things she had wanted, not things she wanted to buy, experiences, moments. Most of them were small: drive along the coast in the fall, cook a big meal for no reason, spend a weekend where we don't talk about work or money, hear Thomas laugh until he cries. I do not know the last time she heard me laugh like that. Let me tell you what I know now that I did not know then. I know that your body keeps score. I spent 30 years eating at my desk, eating fast, eating whatever was convenient, and my body forgave me for longer than it should have. When the heart attack came at 67, it was not a surprise to my cardiologist. He told me afterward very calmly that my arteries looked like those of a man who had been at war with himself for decades. He was right. I had treated my body like a machine with no maintenance requirements. You cannot do that. You will get the bill eventually, and when you do, the interest is brutal. I know that silence between two people is not the same as peace. For years, I thought Ruth and I were fine because we were not fighting. We had this very civil, very ordered life, and I confuse the absence of conflict with the presence of love. They are not the same. Love requires contact, real contact, not just physical proximity. It requires asking how someone actually is, and then sitting still long enough to hear the real answer, not the polite one. I never did that consistently. I was always half somewhere else. I know that your children do not need your money half as much as they need your presence, your specific and undivided attention. The experience of being with you and knowing that you are not about to leave. Daniel and I rebuilt something in the last 4 years. It was hard. There were conversations that took hours and left both of us raw in a way I was not used to. He told me things I did not want to hear. I sat with them anyway. That is what I should have been doing when he was 12. But you cannot go back. You can only go forward with more honesty than you brought before. I know that accomplishment without witness is just noise. I have awards and boxes in a storage unit, plaques, certificates, things that were hung on walls and then, when I moved, ended up wrapped in newspaper and stacked in the dark. Not one of them means anything to me now. What I think about now when I sit in this beautiful empty house are the specific textures of small moments. The smell of Ruth's coffee in the morning, the sound of Daniel's laugh when he was 8 and found something genuinely funny, the weight of an ordinary afternoon when nothing significant happened and everyone was just together. I want to say something about ego because I think ego quietly destroyed more of my life than anything else, and it looked like confidence the entire time. I was a man who was very rarely wrong professionally. I made good calls. I built things that still stand, and I let that competence bleed into my personal life in a way that was corrosive. I treated arguments with Ruth the way I treated engineering problems. There was a correct answer. I usually had it. The goal was to establish that I was right. I won a lot of those arguments. I won them, and I did not understand for decades that winning an argument in a marriage is sometimes how you slowly lose the marriage. There is something the Stoics talked about that I misunderstood my entire adult life. I thought Stoicism meant not feeling things. I thought it meant being unmoved, controlled, impenetrable. I used it as a philosophical justification for emotional absence. What I understand now is that the Stoics were not talking about suppressing emotion. They were talking about not being ruled by things outside your control. Your feelings, your connections, the people you love, those are not things to be controlled. They are the entire point. Marcus Aurelius wrote about impermanence, not to make you cold, but to make you present. To make you understand that the moment you are in right now is the only one you are guaranteed. I read that when I was 40. I understood it when I was 74. The house has 4 bedrooms and a study and a fireplace I had custom built from stone I chose myself. Every detail of this house was chosen with intention, and it took me 50 years to apply that same intention to the people who should have been in it. That is the trade I made, and I made it without realizing I was making it. You are probably somewhere between 20 and 50 years old watching this. You are probably tired. You are probably behind on something. There is probably a person in your life you have been meaning to call, a conversation you have been putting off, a moment of softness you have been holding back because it does not feel efficient or productive or strong. Put the phone down after this video, not to rest. To reach out to whoever comes to mind first when you ask yourself, who have I been taking for granted? Don't write a long message. Just say you were thinking of them. That's it. Because one day you will live in a house with 4 bedrooms and a custom stone fireplace, and you will understand exactly what those words were worth. This channel receives real stories every day from people around the world and shares them through videos created with artificial intelligence. If you have a story you want to tell, one about regret, about second chances, about a life that taught you something the hard way, send it through the link pinned in the first comment. We will tell it with the honesty it deserves. If this story made you stop and think, even for a moment, leave a like and subscribe. Not for me, for the version of you that might need to hear this again in 10 years and hopefully won't.